Good morning. Today on our journey through the Old Testament this year, we read chapter 11 and 12 of Leviticus. And these two chapters, or chapter 11 specifically, I guess, deals with clean and unclean food. And then chapter 12 deals with women after childbirth. And we'll get to that in a minute. But the clean and unclean animals of things that the Israelites could eat, could even touch, it's quite a list, and it's very specific. God has very specific characteristics. He says, for among the land animals, he says there are creatures that you may eat. Any animal that has divided hoofs and cleft hoofs and chews the cud, you may eat. So if they have a divided hoof or a cleft foot and they chew the cud, there's two very specific requirements. And then it says, but among those that chew the cud or have divided hoofs, you shall not eat a camel, because, it chews the cud, but it doesn't have divided hoofs, so it's unclean. The rock badger and the hare, and, very specific reasons, and it depends, on the foot of the animal and on whether or not it chews the cud. And there is a little bit of controversy whether, like the hare, it says it chews its cud, but it doesn't have divided hoofs. So does it really chew cud? I mean, it's immaterial, but, so the pig falls into this category of unclean. And, so we don't have stories of, the Israelites, having herds of pigs. I mean, they couldn't eat them. They couldn't, do anything. And if they, even touched them, they were unclean. And so this was a part of it too, that if the human, touched this unclean animal or ate some of the unclean animal, heaven forbid that, it was, this person then was unclean. And to be unclean meant that, number one, you couldn't go into the tabernacle. You were, a little bit excluded, but it was very specific on all of these things. And it's one of the reasons that, like Jesus' story of the prodigal son or the loving father is so controversial in a way to the Jews, because here this son he's tending the swine, the pigs, and that's terrible. They wouldn't even do that. And the story of the demoniac with all of the demons, cast into the herd of pigs for the Israelites. That herd of pigs wasn't worth anything anyway, but to the people that owned them, they certainly were. And these laws of clean and unclean, think about in the New Testament with, Peter, and this vision that he had, with the sheet coming down with all of these different foods on it, and I can't eat. These are unclean foods, and the words are, what I have made clean is clean. So all of this clean and unclean was changed in the New Testament, with his vision, that way. But it's very specific, on animals, and then on starting in verse 9 of the things that are in the waters. Things with fins and scales, whether in the seas or streams, you can eat. Well, you think about what don't have fins or scales. I mean, crabs, clams, shrimp, lobster, there are, many seafoods that were specified, these you don't eat. A snail, I mean, they don't have, and for in some places, snails are a delicacy, and I mean, shrimp and lobster and, crab legs, I mean, those are, a lot of people eat them on a real regular basis. We go to restaurants that are specifically, geared to preparing those particular kinds of food that were outlawed. I mean, that's basically what it was to be unclean, was to be outlawed by God. And the birds, think about birds, and when I think about birds, the first thing comes to my mind are like, sparrows and robins, and but God's not talking about just the little songbirds, but the ostrich is one of these that's listed as unclean. And I know that there are places in the world that eat a lot of ostrich meat today. But some of the ones that are unclean are the eagle and the hawk and the osprey and the vulture, and some of these birds that we wouldn't even really consider too much today, like the crow. And but yeah, we think about turkeys and chickens. I mean, those are birds, and they're a staple for many people's diets. And so it's all in here. And then it goes to verse 20, insects. I mean, insects, who eats insects? Well, I mean, there are insects that get eaten, but you're not supposed to eat, the locust was legal to eat, but, there was a mention of a cricket. The cricket according to its kind, and the grasshopper according to its kind, you could eat. But all other winged insects that have 4 feet are detestable to you. I mean, so it's, a specific list of do's and don'ts, cans and can'ts, eat this, don't eat that, and all of those things that way. And then verse 24, by these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them, is unclean until evening. So it wasn't a permanent, uncleanness, but, a lot of times it was just until evening. You'll wash his clothes and be unclean till evening. Every animal that has a divided hoof but not cleft-footed and doesn't chew his cud, if you touch one of those, you're unclean. And so that's, you would not be a swineherd. I mean, that's just out of the picture that way. And it goes on, verse 29, these are unclean among you, creatures that swarm upon the earth, the weasel, the mouse, the great lizard, the gecko, the land crocodile, the lizard, the sand lizard, and again, I mean, some of those we can't even really picture eating, and it's just, in today's world, most people, think of a squirrel, as, or, rabbit, and some of that thing. But there have been times that, and for some people, that's a part of their staple diet, and people that raise rabbits for food, and I mean, it's there it is. But, here we have very specific lists of you can and you can't eat of this, and then it goes on in this section that talks about, like, if a mouse falls into a glass, an empty one, or a bowl, well, that is unclean until you do something, and not only a mouse, but some of these other uncleans. Or if it falls into a water barrel, per se. I mean, this is a terrible tragedy. Here you got a mouse in your water barrel, or one of these unclean animals. It's not what you would want to have, and all of that. So very, very specific. Verse 42, whatever moves on its belly and whatever moves on all fours or whatever has many feet, these creatures, I mean, so snakes are in that, I mean, they're just kind of but, again, there are places where some of these large snakes, are used for meat. But God is setting down for his people a list of things to eat and not to eat, to touch and not to touch, to see how well they're going to be able to listen and follow instructions. And then in verse 44 and 45, we have God saying, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And so you are holy. Sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. So there's 5 or 6 times in the book of Leviticus that this is used. I, the Lord God, am holy, so therefore you are holy. Or you are holy because I am holy. And it's just that reminder that, because of who God is, changes who we are. And Peter quotes this, I am holy since you are holy since I am holy, from God as well in 1 Peter. So we see that and hear that, several times. And it's, verse 45, for I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Just good reminders. And then chapter 12, as I mentioned at the start, deals with a woman after childbirth. And, it doesn't make sense to me why, there's a difference between having a male child or having a female child as to the length of impurity, or being impure rather, but for each of them they had a sacrifice to come to, as a part of this ritual that God decreed that way. And but also within here again, it was that on the 8th day, the male children would be circumcised. So again, we're finding very specific things that God has set out for his people to follow. And as I mentioned earlier too, that this covenant here has been superseded by the new covenant in Jesus Christ.